Well, here we are. We are back once again with another preview. I believe this is week number 21 or 22 of the MLS regular season. To be honest, I kind of are starting to lose a little bit track on exactly what week we are in. And I should know this because I do this almost every single week, and I should be knowing which week it is if I do this every single week. But to be honest, I kind of lost track of it. And it's not like you can just go on the MLSsoccer.com website and you can just go there and check to see which week it is, because they don't really post it. Instead, they put dates of the week. But either way, let's talk about this week. And there are definitely a lot of good games this week. There's also two derby games this week, which I'll get to both of these two. But first of all, we're going to get into the first game. By the way, there's also going to be 10 games this week. There is going to be 9 on Saturday and only 1 on Sunday. The only game on Sunday is the Minnesota versus LAFC game. And I can assure you that the Quakes are not playing this weekend, although they are playing on Sunday in a friendly match against Manchester United. So, at least for once, I don't really need to really just stress out and just kind of suffer another kind of punishment, as it's pretty much what it seems whenever I go and watch Quakes games. But either way, let's talk about the other team and let's talk about the other games. And we start off with Atlanta versus DC United. So, Atlanta, of course, drew 1-1 against the Sounders. And DC United won 3-1 in their home opener at Audi Field. And I don't know why this is always the case, but it feels like whenever Atlanta draws a big crowd, they always tend to not get a good result. I mean, I remember earlier in the season, they drew a big crowd, and they also got like a 1-1 draw. So it's almost as if, you know, as much as Atlanta is considered probably, you would say, the best fan base in MLS, and they have the largest crowd, it doesn't really give Atlanta a lot of advantage, and in many ways kind of pressure them, and there's more at stake at them. And, you know, Atlanta hasn't been playing very well lately, but they're still on top of the Supporters' Shield standing. And DC United, you know, I've been hearing kind of some people discussing that this team could still possibly make the playoffs. And even though technically they are in the bottom of the Eastern Conference, and I think they're like 13 or 12 points back of the red line, some people still said that they still have a chance. And I will say that they do still have a chance, but it's not a big chance. I think it's kind of like this tiny of chance of making the playoffs. And the only reason why I kind of will agree with those people and say that they still have this kind of tiny chance is that they have a lot of games at Audi Field for the remaining of the season. This is only one of the rare road games that they're going to get for the remaining part of the season. And this is also the first road game for Wayne Rooney and DC United. And I wonder, will he potentially start in this game? Will Ben Olsen be brave enough and put him in the starting 11, and hopefully he can make some present against a very good Atlanta team? Because I think, for me, I would definitely could put him in there, but I know for a fact that I'm going to have to burn a substitution later on, because Wayne Rooney is not going to play the full 90 minutes. And I think for DC United, the only way I can see them winning this is that they'll do some voodoo magic that they did last season against Atlanta, where they just, like, the only team that seems to have figured out Atlanta's out, although Atlanta this season has kind of started to figure out DC United and finally find a way to finally beat them and get their first win against them earlier in the season. But yeah, moving on to the next match, Seattle. They play against their Cascadia neighbor Vancouver, and you know, the Sounders, of course, they only won 1 of their last 6, while Vancouver have lost the last 3 road games, and those 3 road games were ugly losses. I mean, I think the only game that they did not lose very ugly is oh god, I forgot which one it was, but I know for a fact that Vancouver has lost 4-0 to Philly, and last week they lost 3-1 to DC United. They're not very good kind of losses that you want to take on the road. And, you know, for the Sounders, I still cannot believe why people still think that this team can potentially make the playoffs, and that, you know, some of the fans say that they eventually can turn it on. I really still think that the Sounders team is better off to just rebuild. And they already kind of started that process. They just recently got their DP in the striker position, which is a position that they've been desperately trying to get, and the fans are just crying out the front office to get, and they finally got one. They got this guy called Raul Real Diaz. He was coming from Monaco Marais, and he's also a Peruvian striker for them. And, you know, I will say that, you know, I haven't heard a lot of scouting report about this guy, but if this is the guy that they think that can definitely get them back to the top, then that is going to be the guy, because once you sign him in a DP kind of contract, usually you are going to be committed to that guy. And, you know, that certainly is the first piece for the Sounders to build on. I still haven't heard a lot from them to potentially sell some of their players, and I'm only guessing that maybe they're going to try to do this in the winter, where they're going to start to do a clean house, get rid of these old guys, get rid of these guys that probably is not going to be part of the squad that is going to be rebuilding starting next year, and also starting now. But, you know, I just think for the Sounders, you know, this is step one to their rebuilding process, and I feel like for the rest of the season, this is going to be where they are. And heck, I don't know why people still think that they can make the playoffs, consider they only won one of their last 6. And that game they won was against Colorado. I mean, everybody can beat Colorado nowadays. But moving on into the next match, the Red Bulls, they take on the Revs. So the Red Bulls, of course, won 3-2 against Sporting KC at home, which was a massive win for them. While New England lost an absolute heartbreaker to the Galaxy, and this was what you call the Quakes kind of moment that New England just suffered, because they were leading 2-1 heading into stoppage time against the Galaxy, only to lose 3-2 and give up 2 late goals in stoppage time and lose to a Galaxy team that, you know, it looked like they were potentially going to get a loss on the road. And certainly that has to be a very painful loss for the Revs, because, you know, not only they drop points at home, but they drop all 3 points, and all 3 of those points should have been in the hands of the Revs. And the Revs this season have not known for blowing leads, so this definitely is a bit of a surprise, and that this was definitely not what I expected from New England. Like, when I saw New England leading heading into stoppage time in that game against the Galaxy, I thought they're gonna get this done. I mean, they're not one of those teams that have trouble kind of closing out games, but, you know, they're gonna have to try to put that behind them, because they now will have to go on the road, which has not been their best friend, and they have to go on the road against one of the best teams in the Eastern Conference, that is the Red Bulls. So this is definitely not going to be an easy task for the Revs, and certainly you would say that the Red Bulls should be favorites coming into this one. But yeah, next up, speaking of heartbreaks, Chicago. Well, they lost a heartbreaker in their last match against the Union. Well, actually, it wasn't the last match. It was 2 matches ago. But you know how I always make fun of Chicago and how they are a team that has been kind of inconsistent this season and having kind of like ups and downs kind of season. Well, they now find a new way to make that inconsistent kind of type to show their fans by winning or not winning, but by going unbeaten 5 games in a row, only to lose 3 straight. And they're pretty much right back where that inconsistent and mediocrity line is. And these 3 straight losses have really hurt the Fire, because this was a team that, after they were in that 5-game unbeaten streak, they were already above the red line, and they looked like they were going to get 5th place away from the refs. But this 3-game losing streak has put them all the way down to 8th place. And in a race that is very tight in the Eastern Conference, that is the playoff race, the Fire cannot afford to keep losing games. Now, they are going to be playing against TFC, and this TFC team, the more that I'm seeing this team, the more that I think they're not going to make the playoffs. And I just don't know when is this team eventually going to kind of turn it on. I mean, I know this team has a lot of injury, especially at the back, where the entire back line is just obliterated. But I still think that this team should still have enough quality going forward to try to get something going. And yet, in the last game, they lose to Orlando. And that was an Orlando team that had lost 9 straight coming into that one, and they allowed them to finally get their first win. So things is definitely going bad for TFC, and you know, certainly the panic button is being smashed by TFC fan, knowing that this comeback might never happen. Like, this team could potentially be stuck where they are right now, and they're gonna actually miss the playoffs this season because of that, which, you know, I know that it might sound kind of like a catastrophic failure for Toronto, consider they were in the MLS Cup and they were in the CCL final this year, and now they all of a sudden they're not going to even make the playoffs. But in some sense, I would say if they do not make the playoffs, you would say that it's kind of good for them, consider it's pretty clear that most of the guys that is on that team is just getting absolutely exhausted. I mean, when you been into an MLS Cup final 2 straight year, and then you have to play like CCL for and how deep they had to go in CCL to that exhaustion probably have kind of took them, and you know, I just don't know if they're gonna turn it on this season. The longer this winless run goes for TFC, and the more that they're not going to show signs that they can start to come back and start to maybe get some wins, then I think this team is not going to make the playoffs. You know, and this is not the first time we've seen a team that won MLS Cup the previous year and then missed the playoff the very next season. Although I think this one is not as bad as what Portland did a couple of years ago. I mean, that was quite shocking how Portland can be winning MLS Cup one year and then the very next year not even making the playoffs, considering the fact that the Timbers do have a very good squad. And I don't think that year they actually suffer a lot of injury, and they didn't really even have to play CCL in that year, so they were a pretty fresh squad. But, you know, overall, when I look at this Chicago versus TFC game, you know, this is a game where for Chicago, it's big for them because they got to snap out of this funk, and they need to try to kind of keep pace with other team around them that is fighting for those playoff position in the Eastern Conference. And for TFC, they themselves also have to snap out of this funk and really think about starting this comeback and starting this playoff push that we've been talking about throughout this season, but it just never have materialized. And they are running out of time, since now we're heading into August and there's only 2 months left in the season. Well, actually 3 months left in the season, but only 1/3 of the season left. But moving on, next match, the Union take on the Galaxy. The Union is one of the other team that is fighting for playoff position in the Eastern Conference, while the Galaxy have been unbeaten in 6 games, and certainly it would have been snapped at 5 games if they did not have that miraculous comeback. And, you know, for the Galaxy, you could say that they are starting to get a little bit better, and that, you know, they are starting to kind of come back into the playoff picture. In fact, they're actually now above the red line. But one thing that says to me that I'm still a little bit concerned about this Galaxy team is that defense. I mean, they have that one good performance against Columbus, but then the rest of the performance in this unbeaten streak have not been very good. And the only reason why the Galaxy have this unbeaten streak is because this attack for the Galaxy is just firing on all cylinders right now. I mean, they are just absolutely hot right now, and if this attack did not score goals for fun in this unbeaten streak, who knows where the Galaxy would be. The Galaxy would have been in a winless streak right now. But Philly, of course, got that dramatic 4-3 win against Chicago. And then in the midweek, they also move on into the U.S. Open Cup semifinal as they beat Orlando City. So certainly they will have a bit of momentum into this, although the Galaxy does have that extra rest. And this should be a very interesting game to watch. I think it's a very kind of even game, in my opinion. You know, if the Galaxy defense can hold up in this one, then I think maybe they can potentially win. But if the Union can actually finish for once and actually can start scoring goals without just fluffing it whenever they go on the attack, then I think the Union could win this one. But yeah, next up, Columbus. They play against Orlando City, and Columbus is in a bit of a trouble right now. I mean, they have only won 1 of their last 6 games, and because they're in this kind of really bad run in June and now heading into July, this team have now been caught up by teams that is currently in 5th and 6th place, and the kind of logjam that is between 5th and 9th place right now. And it's really, right now, if you look at the Eastern Conference, you know, before I said that there was only 1 spot up for grabs, and then there was 2 spots up for grabs because New England started to struggle. And now with Columbus struggling, it looked like there's actually 3 spots that is going to be up for grabs in the Eastern Conference. I mean, all those teams down there are just fighting out for those spots, and this could be very intriguing as we heading down the stretch of the season. But for Columbus, this is a horrible news that they are being caught up by those teams, because this was a team that was near, I think they were as high as 2nd when they had that long kind of unbeaten streak, but then they kind of hit, once again, they kind of nosedive again, like they have been so far pretty much throughout this season, where whenever they go on a high, then they just go on a low once they hit their first loss and got their winning streak kind of snap. Well, Orlando themselves, well, they finally broke the duck, and that is certainly, I'm pretty sure a lot of Orlando City fans are pretty relieved that they finally broke the duck, although they did lose to the Union in the U.S. Open Cup semifinal, and I think that probably might dampen their spirits. But I really think that, you know, for Orlando City, and knowing that now they have a new manager, that is James O'Connor, I think he will definitely get this team back to where they're supposed to go, which is the playoff position. Because once you break that 9-game losing streak, once you finally break that losing streak, then the players will start to no longer feel that pressure of them not ever gonna win a game, and that they will finally started to play with a little more freedom, and certainly play with a little bit more confidence than when they were on that depressing long losing streak that they were on. But, you know, this game is on the road for Orlando City, and they are playing against a struggling Columbus team. And for Columbus, one other thing that I also have to mention is that there are now reports that Zach Steffen, the goalkeeper for the Columbus Crew, could be moving to Bristol City. And if that move happens, then that is a huge blow to Columbus, because Zach Steffen has been just, you know, he's been absolutely godly for the U.S. men's national team when he was called upon, and it's the same when he is with Columbus. He has just been absolutely incredible. He's making a couple of big saves in this game, and if they lose him, and knowing that when they lose him and they put their backup goalkeeper in place and their second string goalkeeper, it's pretty clear that it's not as good as when Zach Steffen is behind the stakes. So if they lose him, then that is going to be a huge blow for them. But I also think that one thing that they got to start to figure out for Columbus is that they got to figure out how to score again, because right now the Crew, one of the big attribute to this this very bad run that they're on is that they are not scoring at all, and that the goals are starting to dry up. You know, Jerzy Zardes has started to not score again, and when he's not scoring for the Crew, then this whole team is going to be in a flunk. So they're going to have to figure that out and figure out their scoring mark again, and, you know, hopefully maybe they can finally snap out of this flunk that they're in. But yeah, now moving on into the two derby games that I get to talk about. So first of all, we got Houston versus FC Dallas. We got the Texas Derby. So this derby, believe it or not, the last 4 out of the 5 matches have all ended in a draw. And the only time that during the last 5 games that a team actually won, it was FC Dallas that beat the Dynamo 1-0 back in 2016. And, you know, this match, I have a feeling it could be another draw because, you know, on one hand, you got FC Dallas, who is doing very good so far this season. And even though they did lose Mauro Diaz, it doesn't seem like they have shown signs that they are going to, you know, struggle so far this season. On the other hand, you got Houston, who has been pretty decent at home this season, despite the fact that they did kind of had a little bit of a bad start in their home turf earlier in the season. So, you know, this is definitely going to be a very interesting kind of matchup. And keep in mind, Houston also play in the quarterfinal of the U.S. Open Cup, and they were able to win that one against Sporting KC and move on into the semifinal. So that definitely will give a little bit confident for them heading into this Texas Derby. But in many ways, I think this could potentially be a draw because Houston, they just do not lose at home. And FC Dallas, you know, at times this season on the road, they have not looked good whatsoever. They have, whenever there's a big game happening on the road, they tend to lose that one. So, you know, this is a big game because it is a Texas Derby. And, you know, Houston, I think where they are in the standing doesn't really truly tell how decent this team is. I really think the only reason why this Dynamo team is not up there in the top 4 or in the top 5 or even above the red line is because they're just blowing leads left and right and left and right. And if they do not blow those leads and that they do not blow a lead to either not get all 3 points or lose a point, then this team would have been above the red line right now and it would be a decent team. But the other derby, the Rocky Mountain Derby between RSL versus Colorado, well, this one is pretty predictable. I mean, I think RSL should be able to win this because RSL has been pretty much the best home team so far this season. I mean, this team have not lost at home since that 5-1 home opener embarrassment to LAFC, and they're playing against a Rapids team that have not won on the road in the Rocky Mountain Derby in 3 of the matches whenever this one takes place at Rio Tinto. So this should be a pretty obvious one. I think RSL is going to win it, and despite the fact that RSL did lose to Minnesota, which again, it just brings me back to what I say. I don't understand why this RSL team just cannot win on the road. And even against some of the easiest team on the road, they still find a way to lose. And yet, when they play at home and they play good team like Sporting KC and FC Dallas, they win those games. So, is there really something about Rio Tinto that makes RSL just so good? And in many ways, this RSL team kind of reminds me of the Quakes last season, where the Quakes last season was just so good at home, and that they only lost like 2 games at home, but on the road they were absolutely woeful. And as long as if RSL can continue this kind of good home form and maybe snatch 1 or 2 win on the road, then I think this team should be able to make it to the playoffs. But for Colorado, well, they are not going to definitely make the playoffs. And yeah, Rapids fan, unfortunately, despite the fact that you had that mini 2-game winning streak, that probably is maybe the most celebratory kind of thing you might have so far this season, because it's back to reality for Colorado, and I think this team is going to start to lose games left and right again. But moving on into the final two games, Portland take on Montreal. So Portland finally had their long 14 games unbeaten streak in all competition been snapped by LAFC in the U.S. Open Cup quarterfinal. But that game was a little bit of a controversial one. And, you know, there was actually two controversial incidents that happened. One of them was DL allegedly said that some of the Portland Timbers fan made some racist remark toward him, and that, you know, I'm pretty sure that Portland will investigate that, and they will definitely fine, if not just kick out those fans and ban those fans from going to Timbers game or go to any MLS game for a couple of years. But the other controversy in this game has to do with the international player for LAFC, and that they may have put way too much international player in a U.S. Open Cup match. Because the thing about the U.S. Open Cup match is that you can only allow to have a maximum of 5 international player in a U.S. Open Cup match, and since LAFC allegedly used 7 in that game, Portland is actually protesting to the U.S. Federation and saying that, hey, you know, they broke the rule. They put way too much international player on that team, and, you know, we'll see what happened with that. You know, we'll see if LAFC could potentially get disqualified in the U.S. Open Cup, and, you know, if they do get disqualified for in the U.S. Open Cup because of putting too much international player on that game and they broke the rule, then I'm not surprised, because, you know, I think in some ways, I feel like what many people don't understand is that some team can just get away with the rules whenever they get into this deep into the tournament. And I think if they find that LAFC have used 7 international spot and that they have used more international spot than they should be allowed, then I really think that LAFC is going to get disqualified, and I think the Timbers should be able to move on. And I know there's one incident a couple of years ago where Real Madrid themselves also got kicked out of the Copa del Rey. I forgot what was the incident. I think it was kind of similar to the international player, or actually I think they feel like an ineligible player, and the Spanish Federation found that out, and they basically kicked them out. So if Real Madrid get kicked out of a domestic competition, then any team in the world could easily be kicked out of a domestic competition if they break the rules. So we're going to find out what happened with that, and because of that incident, that means the U.S. Open Cup semifinal draw is going to be delayed. But going back to this game between the Timbers and Montreal, so despite they did get their 14-game unbeaten streak snapped, I think Portland still have their 12-game unbeaten streak in MLS, which is still the longest in MLS. And they're playing against an Impact team that has been pretty red hot lately, winning 5 of their last 6 games. But I just think that, like that NYCFC game, this is just one that is going to be really hard for them to get a result. I mean, you know, Montreal, they don't do well on the road, and they're playing against a Portland team that is just, they are just rock solid at home this season. I mean, besides RSL this season at home being rock solid, so is Portland. And I think they're also one of the 2 teams so far in MLS that is still currently unbeaten so far at home. Well, technically 1 of 3, because DC United, of course, are 1-0-0, and I guess at least DC United fans can kind of use that as a recognition and say that, hey, at least we're one of those 3 teams in MLS that still have not lost a game at home. But, you know, I expect Portland to win this one, and they will extend their 13-game winning, or not winning streak, but 13-game unbeaten streak. And we'll find out later, will they be moving on into the semifinal if LAFC does get disqualified because of the breaking the rule on the international player at a US Open Cup match. But finally, speaking of LAFC, they will be playing on Sunday, and they're going to be playing against Minnesota United. And Minnesota is another team that, despite the fact that you don't think they're doing very well this season, well, they have won 4 of their last 5 home games, and they are one of those teams that have been doing very well so far at home. Although they are playing against LAFC, and this is an LAFC team is unbeaten in 9 games in all competition, and despite all the distraction of them potentially going to get kicked out of the US Open Cup, I don't think they're going to really worry about that, and they're going to focus on this one against Minnesota. And I think the only way I can see Minnesota potentially winning this one, or even getting a result in this one, is that if Darwin Quintero can once again provide his genius moment and basically score goals for Minnesota. I mean, can we just give a really big appreciation and just a big kind of clap in the hand to Darwin Quintero and what he has done for Minnesota? I mean, this is probably one of the best DP signing that we have seen in this league. That is Darwin Quintero going to Minnesota, because ever since he's been with Minnesota, he has completely revolutionized the squad and really made this team believe that they could potentially get into the playoffs. I mean, this is a team that, despite the fact that they do still lose on the road, at least they're actually winning games at home, and they're winning some big games at home against teams that are going to be battling against them for that final playoff spot. And why not? I mean, Minnesota could potentially sneak into it. Although, what I kind of don't understand about their second DP that they have just recently announced is that second DP is also a striker. And it's getting to a point where I don't understand why in the world does Minnesota waste another DP on an attacking piece when it's pretty clear that the main problem for Minnesota is the midfield and the defense. I mean, that defense and midfield is the Achilles heel for this Minnesota team, and it's the reason why they always are in these kind of close game, because they made some stupid kind of mistake. And heck, in the last game against the Revs, they made that really stupid kind of penalties that they conceded and give the Revs 1 goal back and get them back into the game. And if they actually have a decent kind of midfield and defense, that mistake would have never happened. But I just think that because of that, and because how good LAFC is right now, going forward, they are going to definitely maybe have a field day against that weak kind of midfield and back line of Minnesota. But either way, I hope you guys enjoyed this video. If you do, make sure you guys leave a like, smash that subscribe button. Let me know in the comments below, what do you think of all these 10 games. Make sure you guys leave a prediction below for all these 10 games. And yeah, I hope you guys enjoyed this video, and I will see you guys next time.